Last time, we delved into the noble world of knights, those brave, occasionally misguided souls who dared to challenge the greatest monsters of legend. And what, pray tell, was the ultimate foe of the chivalric hero? Why, the mighty dragon, of course. But dragons didn't just appear out of nowhere. No. These scaly, fire-breathing behemoths have haunted the human imagination for thousands of years, popping up in myths from China to Mesopotamia, from Viking sagas to medieval bestiaries. So today, in honor of Dragon Week, we're diving into the origins of dragons, where they come from, why so many cultures imagine them, and what real-world creatures might have inspired them. But before we dive into the heart of dragon lore, a quick note about Dragon Week. This event is part of an annual community celebration created by Ginny D and Pointy Hat, bringing together creators from all over to celebrate monsters. This year's theme is, of course, dragons, and it's all about sharing our passion for these mythical creatures with fellow creators and fans alike. So, as part of Dragon Week, I'm excited to be contributing my video, and I encourage you to check out the other fantastic content going on throughout the week. Let's start with the oldest known dragon myth. That honor likely belongs to Tiamat. No, not the multi-headed queen of dragons from Dungeons & Dragons, I mean the primordial goddess from Babylonian mythology. The real Tiamat is older than written history in most places, emerging from the Enuma Elish, a creation myth from around 1800 BC. Tiamat was the goddess of the Salt Sea, a symbol of primordial chaos. With her partner Apsu, the freshwater god, she birthed the first generation of gods. Naturally, as with all children, they were loud, reckless, and a threat to the peace. When Apsu decided to wipe them out, Tiamat initially defended her children, but after Apsu was killed by the gods, she turned. And oh, did she turn. She became a cosmic terror, birthing an army of monsters, crowned her new consort Kingu, and handed him the divine tablet of destinies, because apparently in Babylon, chaos comes with receipts, and backup consorts. Cue Marduk, the young storm god. The gods cut a deal with him, defeat Tiamat, and he gets to be king. He accepted, preparing a storm of winds and a divine bow, with which he met her in single combat. Using the winds to hold her open, he fired an arrow into her heart and split her in two. From her body, he created the heavens and the earth. Her ribs formed the sky, her eyes birthed the Tigris and Euphrates, and her tail stretched into the stars. In other words, if you're standing on Earth, you're technically on the back of a dead dragon goddess. Which frankly sounds like a very metal album cover. Tiamat is perhaps the earliest example of the dragon as a chaotic force, the serpent to be slain by the bringer of order. You'll see this motif again and again. Leviathan, Python, Jörmungandr, and it begins with her. So yes, the next time you roll initiative against a draconic monstrosity, remember, you're reenacting one of the oldest myths humanity has ever told. In Dungeons & Dragons, the Tiamat of the Forgotten Realms is a five-headed queen of evil dragons, each head representing one of the chromatic colors: red, blue, green, black, and white. She's not crafting the cosmos anymore. She's more into tyranny, treasure hoarding, and being the reason your party wipes in the first round. But the bones of the myth remain: chaos incarnate, commanding legions of monsters, and a threat so great, only divine-level intervention will do. So while she may have traded the Salt Sea for the Nine Hells, she's still the same ancient archetype at heart, the draconic embodiment of power unrestrained, the one thing mortals and gods alike fear to challenge. If Tiamat was chaos incarnate, the dragons of ancient China were something else entirely, more emperor than enemy. Known as Long in Chinese, these dragons weren't fire-breathing terrors. They were celestial, wise, and noble, often associated with water, storms, and the imperial mandate of heaven. In fact, Chinese emperors used the dragon as a symbol of their divine right to rule. Think of it as a very fancy birthright tattoo. These dragons didn't hoard treasure, they were the treasure. Harbingers of rain, prosperity, and cosmic balance. Long, get it, snake-like, and often depicted with antlers and whiskers, they represented the harmonious blend of different animal forms and elemental powers. The number 9 shows up a lot. 9 sons of the dragon, 9 parts of the body. 9 is the emperor's number. Clearly, dragons had good PR in ancient China. And before you go thinking they were harmless, Don't forget that Chinese dragons still controlled storms and floods, so while they weren't necessarily evil, they could ruin your rice harvest if they were in a mood. Now let's head back west, to the Leviathan, that great sea serpent from the Hebrew Bible. In the book of Job, Leviathan is described as a creature that makes the deep boil like a pot, breathes fire, and is so fearsome that no sword can pierce it. Sound familiar? This monster was seen as a manifestation of God's power over chaos, not unlike Tiamat. In fact, some scholars believe Leviathan may have evolved from older Mesopotamian myths like hers. Leviathan later became a symbol of evil and pride, often paired with Behemoth and Ziz to represent the trio of land, sea, and air beasts of Apocalypse. Basically, God's kaiju lineup. Next, a slither into Greek mythology, where we meet Python, a monstrous serpent born from Gaia, the earth goddess. Python guarded the Oracle of Delphi until Apollo showed up, did a bit of divine dragon slaying, and took the place over for himself. This one's worth noting because it establishes another ancient theme: dragons as obstacles to sacred wisdom. If you want prophecy, power, or a shiny new temple, there's probably a serpent in the way. Also, naming a venomous snake Python kind of stuck, so thanks for that, Greece. And finally, we can't forget Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent of Norse myth. This absolute unit of a sea serpent is so big, it encircles the entire world and bites its own tail. He's the son of Loki, yes, that Loki, and he's prophesied to kill Thor during Ragnarok, and die in the process. Their duel is basically mythic mutual assured destruction. Jörmungandr represents the Ouroboros concept, the eternal cycle of life and death, creation and destruction, and he adds to the long tradition of dragons as world-shaping forces, not just big lizards with attitude. So if ancient dragons weren't actually burning down villages and demanding princesses, what were people seeing? Turns out, quite a bit. Start with the obvious. Fossils. Ancient people stumbled across the bones of creatures they couldn't begin to explain. Giant ribs, massive skulls, clawed feet frozen in stone. If you didn't know what a dinosaur was and suddenly found a triceratops skull, what would you think it was? In places like China, these were called dragon bones. In fact, the Chinese word for dinosaur is literally konglong, meaning terrible dragon. Apothecaries even ground up these fossils as medicine. Not great for science, but excellent for dragon lore. Even in Europe, fossils of extinct mammals like woolly rhinoceroses or mammoths were mistaken for dragons or giants. It's like paleontology, the prequel. Nature also played its part. Take the Nile crocodile. With enough imagination, and maybe a poor grasp of reptile migration, it's easy to see how a crocodile could spark tales of scaled, sharp-toothed river monsters. In India, the gharial, a long-snouted crocodilian, has a dragon-like silhouette when seen from a distance. Add a misty riverbank at sunrise, and you've got a myth in the making. Big cats, like leopards or lions, occasionally made their way into parts of Europe and Asia where they weren't native. Combine their strength, speed, and a terrifying roar with a game of drunken telephone over generations, and suddenly you've got a fire-breathing beast that eats knights for breakfast. And don't forget the arapaima, alligator gar, and other prehistoric-looking fish. These things practically invented the phrase, "Do not touch, it bites." Then there's the environment. Volcanoes belching smoke, sudden lightning strikes, deadly fogs rising from swamps. Before weather forecasting, this was all dragon behavior. What else could scorch the land, darken the skies, and make a sound like thunder? Some dragons didn't even need to exist in the flesh. They explained what people couldn't. A distant roar became a dragon in the mountains. A cave's gusting breath? A sleeping worm. The imagination filled in what senses couldn't. And dragon did it beat tectonic subduction every time. If dragons in ancient myth were cosmic forces, sea gods, stormbringers, symbols of primal power, by the time we reach the Middle Ages, they've been cast in a more editorial role. They're villains, allegories, alleged lizardy representatives of sin and Satan. They go from might shape the world to might eat your sheep. And in the pages of medieval bestiaries, they're right at home. Medieval bestiaries weren't scientific manuals. They were part field guide, part sermon, part fever dream. Dragons were usually depicted as enormous snakes with bat-like wings, sometimes with lion paws, sometimes with a camel's head, and always up to no good. One 13th century English bestiary claims that the dragon is the greatest of all serpents, and that it seeks out elephants to kill because, apparently, herpetological homicide was considered peak villainy. Of course, no one had seen this happen, but that didn't stop them from drawing it, with vivid marginalia and captions like, "Here the dragon strangles the elephant with its tail," educational and dramatic. These depictions weren't just for fun. Dragons came to symbolize Satan, sin, heresy, and paganism. If it had wings, breathed fire, and lived in a cave, it was probably a metaphor for your moral failings. Enter St. George, the original knight in shining allegory. The dragon in the Golden Legend isn't just a beast, it's a narrative device. It terrorizes a city, demands sacrifices, and is only defeated when George strolls in, prays, and impales it with a holy lance. He then lectures the locals into Christianity, baptizes 15,000 people on the spot, and rides off like a holy action figure. The lesson? With faith and chivalry, even dragons can be tamed, or at least stabbed into submission. In Western Europe, dragons became symbols of evil, chaos, and corruption. They were foes to be vanquished, beasts of burden for biblical metaphors. Their wings were leathery, their breath toxic, and their fate usually involved a lance to the face. Meanwhile, in the East, particularly China, Korea, and Japan, dragons were almost the opposite. As previously discussed, they remained noble, wise, and often benevolent. In Chinese culture, they controlled rain and rivers, and were closely tied to imperial power, cosmic balance, and good fortune. Eastern dragons are long, serpent-like, and wingless, often flying not through magic or aerodynamics, but because gravity simply respects them too much. Even Japanese dragons, influenced by both Chinese and native mythologies, retain this respect. They're often guardian spirits, protectors of temples or shrines, not monsters to be slain. Two visions of the same sky serpent, shaped by very different worldviews. Early Chinese cosmology is based on balance, yin and yang, heaven and earth, storm and sun. The dragon became a symbol of that balance, particularly with water. It was a bringer of rain, not ruin. It connected the emperor to the heavens, embodied strength without cruelty, and moved between the realms of gods and mortals like a bridge rather than a threat. Confucianism and Taoism also emphasized harmony, not divine struggle. So dragons weren't cast as villains, they were guides, teachers, ancestors, or natural forces, not foes to be vanquished. So one culture sees a thunderstorm and says, "The dragon brings life." Another sees it and says, "The beast comes to punish us." One makes the dragon a crown jewel of its imperial regalia, the other sends in St. George with a spear. And that, dear viewers, is how the dragon became both a monster and a miracle, depending on which direction you look. With centuries of dragon lore behind us, spanning ancient creation myths, medieval morality plays, and spiritual symbolism, it was only a matter of time before dragons found a new home, fantasy fiction. And this is where things really take flight. The renowned J.R.R. Tolkien took that Western archetype of the dragon as greed incarnate and gave us Smaug, a cunning, fire-breathing tyrant coiled atop a hoard of gold. Smaug speaks, schemes, and annihilates armies. He's not just a monster, he's a character, a deadly one. Tolkien set the gold standard, literally and figuratively, for the fantasy dragon. After him, the beast wasn't just something to kill. It had style, swagger, and a voice full of venom. When Dungeons & Dragons hatched in the 1970s, dragons were front and center. The game took all the classic traits, fire breath, hoarded gold, ancient wisdom, and added yet another brilliant twist, color coding. D&D gave us dragons in flavors. Red breathed fire, blue summoned lightning, green exhaled poison. Suddenly, each color came with powers, personalities, and hordes. Dragons weren't just big lizards anymore. They were gods, tyrants, sages, and symbols. Today, dragons come in all shapes and sizes, literally and metaphorically. Whether it's Daenerys' Draconic children, How to Train Your Dragon's misunderstood pets, or Elden Ring's thunder-chucking horrors, the dragons remain a towering symbol of fantasy power. Some stories draw from the noble Eastern archetype, others embrace the Western beast. and most, like Dungeons & Dragons, blend both, creating something fresh and fearsome. So why do we keep telling dragon stories? Because they're mirrors. They reflect what we fear, what we admire, and what we aspire to conquer, be it nature, chaos, sin, or our own inner fire. Whether you're praying to one, slaying one, or rolling dice to politely ask one not to eat your bard, dragons remain the gold standard of mythic storytelling. They're ancient, they're primal, and they're not going anywhere. So what do you think? Which version of the dragon, Eastern, Western, or somewhere in between, feels most powerful to you? And which dragon myth or D&D encounter left the biggest scorch mark on your imagination? Let me know in the comments, and share your favorite dragon tale, whether it's ancient, modern, or from that time your bard tried to seduce one. We've all been there. If you've made it to the end of the video, I thank you deeply. When I first heard about Dragon Week a couple months ago, I knew I had to participate somehow. Honestly, this video took me much longer to make than I originally intended, and most of that delay comes down to factors outside my channel. My job has become increasingly demanding, and a 1-year-old doesn't leave much extra room to work on this stuff. So with that in mind, this video will be the last, longer project for a while. Moving forward, I'll be focusing on shorter videos centered on mythology facts and stories. I've even got a helpful selection of books for Christmas to pull inspiration from, so I'll be using those to keep the content flowing. In the meantime, I really appreciate your patience and dedication to my videos. If you haven't considered it yet, I invite you to become a channel member. For just $3 a month, you'll get early access to videos, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and your name featured at the end of my videos. Thanks again for watching, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more feudal facts. I'll see you all in the next one.